Welcome to Divine Intimacy Radio, a co-production of EWTN Radio and SpiritualDirection.com, where we provide you with a spiritual haven of rest and explore the riches of the wisdom of the saints and the path to union with God.
This is Dan and Stephanie Burke. Welcome to Divine Intimacy Radio, your radio haven of rest,
your hermitage of the heart,
your monastery of the mind, where we lift our hearts and minds to heaven to draw upon the wisdom of the saints to help us navigate the storms of life. And today we're talking about storms.
A real storm.
I mean, not just a small one either.
A huge storm.
A huge storm.
Historic, right?
Historic. And we're talking to Mr. Jason Craig. Why don't you introduce him?
Okay. Jason Craig writes from a small dairy farm in western North Carolina, Polk County. He is the co-founder of Fraternus, founding editor of Sword and Spade magazine, and author of Leaving Boyhood Behind: The Traditional Virtues According to St. Thomas Aquinas and Liturgy of the Land, which I love that last title.
I like that title.
I love that title.
Yeah, Kyle
he holds a master's degree from the Augustine Institute and is known to claim his family invented bourbon.
So what's this claim about, Jason, this bourbon thing?
I really need to rethink the bio that I give people, because that's how it ends, which is how every interview begins. Therefore,
it's great to have you on the show. Let's talk about alcohol.
That's right. Well, I'll give the short story is that my aunt was doing some digging and found out that we are, in fact, descended from Elijah Craig, who, if you've ever noted the bourbon aisle, that's a good, top to mid shelf bourbon. And the stories vary, but he apparently was an illegal Baptist preacher back when you had, I think in Virginia, when you had to be licensed to preach, in the so-called land of the religious freedom. And he was not licensed. And along with being a Baptist preacher, he also made some bourbon in some burnt barrels.
See, that's a contradiction. But I can help you with your bio. Just add this one line. And he is grateful to be Catholic.
And he is grateful to be Catholic. I am grateful.
Yeah, awesome. Well, it's great. I'm grateful to have you on the show. The reason you're on the show, of course, is you're in the midst of the storm still, if you will, or the cleanup of the terrible situation that happened in North Carolina. And I read an article of yours in Sword and Spade magazine. You are an exceptional writer, I will say, by the way.
Thank you.
And was deeply moved by the piece and really resonated with it. We live in a rural area and really are, I wouldn't call us preppers, but we'd like to eventually be totally self-sufficient, even though that's very difficult to do. But the thing that drew me to what you wrote about is more macro societal themes related to the storm, recovery from the storm, and that sort of thing. So let's just begin. Where are you in relationship to the worst situation in North Carolina?
Sure. I'm in Polk County, so we are a part of the declared disaster zone. But I am what we say down the hill. Like, I'm very much in the foothills. So the northern kind of northwest part of my county is where Lake Lure was. If some people have been watching the news, that's one of the famous places because of the potential dam break. And we did get the text alert to evacuate because the dam was breaking, which really freaked my wife out. Although we were not actually in the where that path would have been. So that my direct area was hit very hard when we left the morning of the storm. My neighbor and I, who's also a Catholic and farmer, and we had thought the night before maybe we should go get some gas, which we didn't. And because we thought nobody was taking the storm seriously. Nobody was taking it seriously.
Is this a mountain people thing?
Yeah. I mean, we get it all the time. Oh, there's a hurricane coming, but hurricanes lose strength as soon as they hit land, and we're in the mountains, so there's no way it's going to have that much, oomph to it. And I've lived in Florida. I'm from North Carolina, but I've lived on the coast. I've lived in Florida. I've been through hurricanes, and so that even for myself, just actually my neighbor is from Louisiana. We were just not taking it seriously. But the next morning we drove out and we could not find a passable road for hours, and we had to go to get to the next city that had power. We had to go way south. It took me about 2 hours to get 20 minutes away. So it was, but that was the extent. Here was just trees and power lines. I am not in the area, other than a few select places around here. I'm not where the massive flooding was,
Hmm.
around Asheville. But just north of us is where is Chimney Rock. I mean, Chimney Rock is just north of us, is where that, entire town washed away. Although we were just, with the whole region, we were just knocked out. I mean, when it came to cell service, the internet, obviously power, it wasn't just that the power went out. It was, we really actually got severed. I imagine you and other people knew more about the storm than we did for quite some time, just
Yeah,
because.
interesting, because so you're isolated, no power, you don't know how severe it is. It's interesting to me too. You're thinking, oh, we're in the mountains. How could a hurricane affect us? I totally get the logic, right? Yes, it'll be a storm, but you always think, well, the mountains and the trees will slow down all the wind, and that's actually true unless you have a storm of the century that
Mhm.
just blows through all of that.
What hit, just the force, that it was able to gain, as basically hit with as much force, where it came onto land, was basically A to B, the closest it could get, which is would still not be problematic, except for the storm was just moving so fast. It was really Friday morning. We were just watching, trees fall down and wind blowing, thinking to myself, this is, I can't believe this is happening. We were out in the storm trying to do things with some of the animals, and I remember yelling some choice words at my son. I said, get out from under the trees, stop standing under the trees.
Mm.
Um, but the other reason it was so hard is that we had had like 2 or 3 days of rain beforehand, so the soil was nice and
Ah,
loose. The soil was nice and moist, just ready, and then the winds and the extra rain, just devastated. I mean, there was places we drove where there was more, power lines on the ground than up. It was, just amazing.
so Jason, tell me, once the storm passed, in terms of its intensity, when did you start venturing out to see how your neighbors were and that sort of thing?
It was pretty immediate, and it was a need. It was need that drove us out. First of all, the neighbor right next to me, adjacent to me, is a fellow Catholic, somebody I met through fraternities. He moved here, kind of a conversion to an agrarian. He was a banker. Now he's a butcher, and he has a butcher
A
shop.
banker to butcher. Okay,
Banker
that
to
makes
butcher,
sense.
and
Total
he,
sense.
that's right, and he um, had cows hanging in the freezer, and his generator, the air, he
Oh,
needed some gas, and like I
right.
said, we did not take this seriously. So although he had a backup generator, we didn't have gas and,
Okay.
to run very long. And I mean, we had a little bit, but and then I have a dairy, so immediately those two things become immediately important, because
Right.
Mhm.
the dairy we have, we probably had 25 gallons of milk that we wanted to keep cold, because
Oh,
we
okay.
thought, hey, we might need this for a while.
Yeah.
So I have a generator too, without a lot of gas. As far as venturing out, we went out, I mean, within an hour of the storm,
Okay.
and
Hitting.
being done, I guess,
Oh,
passing.
being done. Okay.
Yeah, once it was sort of over, we went out. And then the family, I mean, we kicked it into gear pretty quickly. We got out the propane heaters, and we got out the fat. This is, I don't know which details you're interested in, but we have a farm, so we store a lot of fat, which we render into, fats, so that we can use for cooking. And told the kids, let's render the fat, because we might be cooking outside on fire for a long time, which is fine, but we're going to need some more fats to keep doing that, because if we can't wash dishes easily or don't have hot water, then you want to have a good layer of fat on the cast iron so nothing sticks. It's easy to wipe
Yeah.
out. So anyway, they were doing that. We were just gathering stuff. We went and got a propane heater. I mean, a propane cooker for another neighbor. Got that to them, and then we went out, and it took us probably 4 hours to get back. Um,
4 hours. So,
it,
how long would it just to get gas? Is that what you were looking for?
oh yeah, I mean, it was less. We're 25 minutes to a gas station, but it took us to the gas station we found in the country. When something happens, people don't wait around for help. So every direction we went, we found someone that was either stuck, and so we did pull somebody out, or, people were cutting out. We were just seeing if we could move some branches and help them. And then we actually got to the gas. Just to put it in perspective, if you're watching the news, the gas shortages, the gas was running out wide open because everyone was going to the only places where they could find power. Well, you know, the way, I guess, I don't know what it's called with gas, but the grid of gas is laid out. You know, there's singular gas stations can't carry an entire region. So we got there, to put in perspective, in enough time to be able to get, my neighbor bought a gas can, which became like gold. And we filled up a bunch of gas and came home. And I'm pretty sure it's all kind of a blur now. I mean, by that evening, we did end up, we checked on all the neighbors right around us, just to make sure they were all, and it was funny, the different degrees of preparedness or concern or freaking out, you know, that different people were having. But,
you know, in your article, you said something that was shocking to me. Like, it was actually really incredibly shocking and disheartening to me, was what happened at the grocery stores.
mm-hmm.
Can you share with that?
Yeah,
that was
one, I didn't even put this in the article, but just a little backdrop of Catholic teaching, Catholic social teaching, that in time of disaster, not only does our faith tell us to love your neighbor, which means practically take care of them, right? The book of James is very clear. Loving your neighbor doesn't, you know, that means giving them food and clothing, things they need.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean just well-wishing. And then in a time of disaster, as you know, the common destination of all goods, meaning you have to use things that are to keep people alive, the sort of certain things that are artificial constructs, meaning constructs of man, they dissolve away in the case of an emergency, right? There's all sorts of things like in an emergency, just like who can baptize, you know, in an emergency, or who, and in an emergency, you feed people that don't have food.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a large corporate chain that was not letting anyone. Well, there was one that had two of them, same chain. One of them had power. They were the ones that were like 2-hour drive for me. They had power, but they could not use cash. Something about the systems were down.
Wow.
And they could not use cash.
Think about that.
And they just, in that moment of great need and disaster, they had real things and we had real money, which in legal tender in our country, that's how we get goods, right? Or how we used to. It definitely made me rethink this whole move away from cash thing. But they couldn't do it because the computer couldn't do it for them. And then I guess they didn't have like calculators or notepads to do the amazingly complicated thing.
Or brains.
No, I think they were probably forbidden. I think the standard operating procedure did not allow them to do that. And then another store of the same chain, it was very clear. All the power was out. So all these goods that could have been used, eaten, given away, were left to rot and thrown away. I couldn't even get them to feed pigs because it was very obvious. I mean, because they can get loss of product insurance on these goods, right? They have insurance. These stores aren't stupid. They have insurance. And it was one of those moments where I recognized, you know, I mean, one of my favorite authors, Wendell Berry, says there is no, and he's not condemning industrialism necessarily with this. He's just saying we just have to acknowledge the fact that there's not an internal logic of industrialism that loves its neighbor.
Yeah, let's pause there. Okay. And we're going to go to a break. When we come back, I want to just continue on with Stephanie's question about what happened at the grocery store. I mean, what you're revealing already is very powerful, and things that we ought to be, all Catholics ought to be thinking about in terms of, you know, natural disasters, but also political disasters, which could very likely overtake us in the next, in the very near term. So we'll be right back with Jason Craig and how to endure in the midst of a storm.
We'll be right back.
The beautiful fact that no suffering is wasted, that all suffering has a purpose, and to wrestle with the idea, which is that everything that happens in our lives is either willed or permitted by God. Okay, God, why would you permit these things? I know that you're a good father and you're a loving father. So there's something there. So I have to bridge this gap between your permission of my suffering to your love for me as a father. And Uniformity with God's Will, the book by St. Alphonsus Liguori, bridges that gap. And he explains, as only he can, because he's such a hard hitter, the reality that these are all moments of growth, of virtue, of, hey, your legs are weak. You're like a newborn deer. You can't stand on your own. We need to get you to stand on your own. Those sorts of things. Even desolation, the day-to-day kind of the ebbs and flows of the spiritual life. Those things are all permitted for a greater good, whatever that might be.
Check out the brand new updated version of Uniformity with God's Will titled Finding Peace in the Storm with commentary by Dan Burke.
Welcome back. This is Divine Intimacy Radio, and you're listening to Dan and Stephanie Burke and Jason Craig, the co-founder of Fraternus and founding editor of Sword and Spade magazine. He wrote an incredible article for Sword and Spade, which we will link in the bottom of the YouTube video that this will produce out at spiritualdirection.com, where he described his experiences and some very powerful insights regarding dealing with this storm in North Carolina. Jason, you were answering Stephanie's question about the grocery store and gave us a little bit of a backdrop of stores that were had goods and that because of silly policies.
Well, insurance, money, greed. Let's just put it out there, right?
Right. He doesn't have to say it. We can say it.
Because one store. So to set it up for those that are returning, one store has power, has their systems up, but they can't process cash.
Can't, in quotes, right?
Yeah. They're not allowed to, and they're not allowed to. So if you're standing there with money, and cash money in your hand, they're not going to let you buy the water. Very things they're not going to let you buy life. Baby formula for your child.
That's
right. Or whatever.
There's some
right?
powerful stuff.
And then another store, same chain. There's no power.
Yeah.
And rather than let people have it, so that they can survive and take care of their kids and each other or whatever, they're going to let the stuff rot on the shelves, in the freezers, in the fridge. So it's just going to rot. You can't even feed it to your livestock. Is that right, Jason?
Yeah. And I guess I want to be careful to defend, the people in the stores. I think what it actually shows is partly the greed and ridiculous, someone who's at making a standard operating procedure at a long distance is, they're making these decisions with liability in mind, with profitability in mind, all sorts of things that just in the moment and in the actual place, to be ridiculous. But I bet if we had them on, they'd be able to defend it. And we go, okay, I kind of see the logic of it, which part of my reflection was like there is a distancing of just humanity and normal human interactions that's occurring in our world, which I was referring to sort of this machine of things. And there might have been other places where this chain, somebody just said, well, whatever, I'm giving away this
sure.
or that. I don't know. But those two experiences of just seeing this barrier that was created unnecessarily between resources and people made me, just one of those moments where I was very grateful. I mean, we have a maybe a significantly different way of life where we do have produce a lot of our own food and then have neighbors that produce food that we never felt like we were going to be hungry, but it was very, once the news started coming in, so we didn't have we didn't know what was going on. I mean, we just had some people texting us saying, hey, it looks like this is going to get worse before it gets better. And we thought, wow, is this going to be a month, without these stores? We didn't know. But it just showed it was a startling wake up call to sort of the way things are that seem quite normal until they're not. And then it becomes, and this was in comparison to small local stores that were perfectly capable and able and willing and eager and alive to help serve and take care of each other.
Yes.
Right, for IOUs. And you said, and there's no doubt these are going to be made good on, which I just love that because without the machine, in quotes, taking over things or ruling things or becoming, which was interesting, almost like an antichrist, I think is how you referred to it. Without the machine, we go back to human values, to these core values of love your neighbor, right, as yourself, provide, take care of each other. And we've lost so much of that in our country, and I think in our world, right?
Yeah, I think so. In the article, I quote Paul Kingsforth, who, in his project, he's sort of that he's been writing on for a couple years, describing what I think a lot of people have described. I mean, I've read writings from Joseph Ratzinger, very similar, where they connect and other Wendell Berries and lots of people have just noted that the spirit of the machine, like what is the spirit of the machine? And obviously it's not a spirit. It is a completely functional thing made by man. What Paul Kingsforth says is that it is um, he thinks that the project of modernity is to replace um, nature with the machine and God with man, right? Which is this complete construct of man. Joseph Pieper talked a lot about this in his works on virtue and leisure and things like that. And this is why it's such a subtle snare that I do think is very clearly connected to the Antichrist. I know, and I try to not sound dismissively crazy in the article, but it's very, I mean, in Revelation, it's very clear what the Antichrist does is essentially remove our identity as children of God, remove our connection and care for one another, mass us together into one giant block. And he does this by primarily by controlling what we buy and sell and how we buy and sell and by what means. So the sort of strange homogenization of weird ideologies, hyper technocratic, you know, bureaucratic, um, uh, and intentionally secular, dehumanizing sort of world of like the global financial thing that's all around us. It's kind of hard to have a name for it, but I think the machine is a good name. I think it is safe to say it's clearly a part of the spirit of the Antichrist. And one of the ways it does that is by actually providing for our needs, which is what it does. It makes it hard to condemn. People, well, you're criticizing the very machine that's going to bring you that gas you were going out into. Like, but again, tyrants, what I say in the article, tyrants give you what you need, right? They don't take away things and keep their tyranny very easily. What the spirit of the machine actually lifts us off of the ground,
Hmm.
away from our neighbor, but still it also pushes us down away from God and puts us on this plane where we're really not connected to either one of those things. And it was just amazing to me how fast humanity revved into being when what I think a lot of our connection to this machine went down. I'm going to be careful I'm not necessarily just condemning all electricity or all technology. Sometimes people will not be able to understand this line of reasoning and argumentation because they think, well, I really like air conditioning. It sounds like the world of artificiality has displaced God and our neighbor, and we don't live for one another. And it makes the gospel very abstracted from, I think, the amazing practicality that is so obvious in the gospel. Things like love your neighbor are not a hard thing to discern. I don't know
You
if you
know,
have a class on that, but you probably don't need one. It's so
it,
simple.
it reminds me, like, what happened to the community reminds me a bit of what the New Testament describes in the second chapter of Acts, where you have, of course, this severe persecution, but then, of course, then the massive I don't want to say conversion, because that's a sort of a gentilized way of looking at the New Testament, but a massive acknowledgement of Jesus as the Messiah, so then this reality is growing, and then you have people who are given their entire lives to this reality, and in so doing shifting to a radical way of living, a different way of living that changed the economic environment such that they needed to be dependent on one another for everyone as a whole to survive. And in a sense, the storm, and this is what you wrote about in the article, forced you and many others into that very kind of reality. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I mean that the any sort of technological advancement, we presume it's just making something we're already doing easier. But in a lot of cases, it's filling a need in some other way that we didn't, that we used to fill it in a different way. And community is not formed by being social with one another. That's an error that a lot of us because we're so saturated consumerism. When someone hears localism or love your neighbor, we typically think it's some sort of ethical purchase or something. But community is actually built by solving problems together. And I got that quote from Robert Nisbet, his, The Quest for Community, a great book, kind of classical conservative book. When we lose our practical need for one another, like our economic interactions, our care for one another, our sharing of necessary things, which, by the way, can include, the necessity of love and care. But when we lose the functional bonds of needing one another, community becomes almost impossible. So we had a barn burn down one time, and all my friends at church, like, oh, we should have a barn raising. I was like, well, there's two problems in having a barn raising. One, you don't know how to build a barn. And two, I have insurance, which means I don't need you. I have replaced you with insurance. So now, which of us, though, is bold enough to cancel his insurance, and rely on his neighbor? Right. But this all of a sudden, that's a hard, those are hard steps to take. But when it all gets stripped away through a storm, well, you're going to go across the street and make sure people are okay, then ask them if they have this, or they're going to ask if you have that.
Great. Well, this has been a great conversation with Jason Craig. He's written a very powerful article about his experience in the North Carolina storm and working with his neighbors and the insights that he gained from that. If you want to continue to understand a perspective regarding how to live life, you can know what it means to have true community. And by the way, if you don't know true community, I would argue you might not know God very well. And that's just something maybe we can explore in our next show. So thank you for being with us, Jason, and for hanging out with us for another show. And with that,
until next time, may the God of peace make you perfect in holiness. May he preserve you whole and entire, spirit, soul, and body, irreproachable at the coming of our Lord, Jesus Christ.
Learn more about the interior life. Visit spiritualdirection.com. Divine Intimacy Radio is a co-production of EWTN Radio and spiritualdirection.com and heard worldwide on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.